So my name's Alexandra, and I did my diploma in counselling and psychotherapy, and I'm a recently qualified psychotherapist. This is my first time presenting at a conference, so please bear with me if I make mistakes or stumble over my words. Um, so I had the opportunity to use polyvagal theory to reflect on my experience of having epilepsy and being a Black Caribbean disabled person, especially in my psychotherapy training. I also appreciate how great it is that I'm following on from Adele's paper as well to give my experience of the other side as a trainee. Um, so I'm going to share how polyvagal theory was helpful to understand my somatic experiences during my training and what was going on for me, and to highlight its limitations in being able to see all the parts of me and my identity. So my paper came about during my second year of my psychotherapy training. The module was the body and intersectionality. And actually, it was at the time, it was a recently introduced module because the place I trained realized that their training was not as intersectional as they hoped it had been prior to that. I was particularly drawn to Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, as well as neuropsychotherapy and the impact of racism and ableism on the autonomic nervous system and experiences in therapy. So I have epilepsy, which, as well as being a neurological condition, is also a nervous system disorder. Mainstream applications of polyvagal theory often assume that everyone has a neutral body, but nobody is neutral, and not everybody holds the privilege of safety. Black and disabled bodies carry histories of marginalization, discrimination, and danger. And if we ignore this, we risk misinterpreting our clients' autonomic states. My paper addresses this gap by centering the lived experience of my Black epileptic body. And therefore, I'm presenting today to share a model that includes polyvagal theory and how I've been able to bridge that gap using anti-oppression authors such as Frantz Fanon, Ghislaine Kinuani, Dwight Turner, and Ray Johnson to demonstrate how therapists can work more effectively with clients like me in a shared therapeutic space. So I have temporal lobe epilepsy, and the temporal lobe is connected to the autonomic nervous system via the amygdala, which is sensitive to threat responses and affect regulation, and the limbic system, which is a group of structures in your brain that regulate your emotions, your behavior, motivation, and memory. It's not easy to know for me what triggers seizures, but affect regulation definitely has an impact on seizure control. When I was first diagnosed, I was told that as well as remembering to take my medication, the best way to control my seizures was just to not get stressed. And we all know how stressful psychotherapy training can be. And so, in entering the training, my biggest concern was how I would be perceived as a Black person and body walking into a white majority room, and what impact this experience would have on my condition. As we know, the training is predominantly white and middle class. And my experience has been that my disability gets ignored because of the color of my skin and the stereotypes that come with it: strong, aggressive, angry, scary, even when I was only trying to engage in the process just like everybody else. My experiences of racism and ableism on my psychotherapy training had a significantly negative impact on me physically and mentally. Yet I noticed in the theory that racism and ableism were missing, and there was a lack of research on the impact this prejudice and discrimination might have on a body with a nervous system disorder. So I noticed as well that polyvagal theory places a tremendous amount of emphasis on responses to safety and danger, particularly Porges' concept of neuroception. Social engagement calms the autonomic nervous system, and defensive limbic structures. We read one another's body language, make eye contact, and this is to determine levels of safety and trust. What polyvagal theory doesn't consider is that neuroception is based upon a neurotypical form of communication, which might be inaccessible to neurodiverse brains. And in terms of the phenomenon of racism, it's often a non-verbal experience that can only be explained through the autonomic nervous system, but it's difficult to articulate verbally and is frequently aggressively challenged and denied by our white peers. On my training, for instance, I'd often be told by my white peers and tutors that I was articulate or well-spoken, which might not always be meant with malice. However, it does suggest a surprise by the white person at my eloquence as a black person. This is a microaggression, which my white peers could not understand, but I did, because it was a signal to me that I wasn't safe as the only black body in the room. Frantz Fanon describes the phenomenon of having one's reality constantly denied as an existential threat to humanity. And he writes, because it is a systematic negation of the other person and a furious determination to deny the other person all attributes of humanity, colonialism forces the people it dominates to ask themselves the question constantly, in reality, who am I? Ghislaine Kinuani describes how this repeated exposure to acute or chronic stress, how this repeated exposure to acute and chronic stress makes it more challenging to regulate the nervous system effectively. When I think about transgenerational trauma, our bodies have been colonized for centuries and carry that systemic trauma. And when our autonomic nervous system is sent into states of distress, it can often feel safer to feign death in dorsal vagal or dissociation. As black and brown bodies, we've been taught from a very young age to suppress ourselves and our reactions. My elders, having lived through the Windrush, the rise of right-wing groups such as the National Front, being held back in school, being stopped by the police just for driving a nice car, being held, they told us as children to keep your heads down, don't say anything, talk properly, so that I would blend in with the white children. Dwight Turner describes this as a form of unconscious compliance or self-othering. If we behave properly, then we won't be attacked. These are also fawn trauma responses. Colonialism has embedded itself into our psyche and the body. This made me think of intuition. As psychotherapists, we're told to follow our intuition, to follow and attune to the client's unconscious world. And when it comes to racism and ableism, it seems almost impossible for therapists to truly trust a client's reality when you've never experienced it yourself. Our white Eurocentric society has taught us that intuition is purely fictional, that discernment is just imagination or bias based on our internal working models or an internalized critical parent. It seems impossible to understand that when you exist within a body that has been repeatedly systemically traumatized and then take that body into any relational situation, you just know whether or not it's safe, especially when history always repeats itself. In his book, My Grandmother's Hands, Resmaa Menakem describes the vagus nerve as the soul nerve. The vagus nerve is connected to the parts of our brain that do not use logical reasoning, but help us navigate our way in the world, what he calls the lizard brain, which is reflexively self-protective. But due to systemic oppression, colonialism, and shame, we've been taught not to trust the very thing that was created to keep us safe. This then influences how we behave in the situation. Interestingly, it's from my stomach where I feel the warnings for my epileptic seizures, which then allows me to prepare to keep myself safe when I'm having a seizure. As a disabled person, I've therefore learned that I'm able to trust my body when something feels wrong. As a therapist myself who works relationally, one limitation I have found in polyvagal theory is its failure to address that systemic forces such as racism and ableism can disrupt relational safety within the therapeutic relationship. In my private practice, the majority of my clients are Black and people of colour and live with a disability, who choose to work with me because I look like them and because I can empathise with their experiences of oppression non-judgmentally. Bonnie Badenoch beautifully describes the therapist as a ventral presence of healing in the therapeutic space. To bring ventral vagal energy into the therapeutic space is to not only connect with the bodies we work alongside, but also to co-create a safe space for them to reconnect with themselves. In my research, I came across Ray Johnson, who's a queer somatic movement therapist. Her framework addresses the embodied experience of racial trauma and oppression. So the 4 steps of the theory are embodied experience of oppression, embodied critical reflection, integrated distillation, the embodied critical experimentation. This provides therapists with concrete ways to notice, interrupt, and shift embodied oppression, and to bring the limitations of polyvagal theory with anti-oppressive practice. I'll now explain the steps based on how I interpret them. So step 1, embodied experience of oppression, is about validating the client's experiences of racism and trauma, because something traumatic has happened to them. I found that colonisation has impacted the way we respond to oppressive trauma, which is to gaslight ourselves into believing we've only imagined that something traumatic has happened. The only way for the brain to cope is to split and dissociate. I also found it helpful to sometimes bring my embodied countertransference, depending on whether or not that feels appropriate to do so. In my own personal therapy journey, just having my experiences of oppressive trauma seen and heard was a life-changing experience for me. Step 2, embodied critical reflection, to me, is the most essential step, because even though the cognitive response has been to split off, the physical response has not. Often, when we don't respond to something traumatic in the moment, we're left with no choice but to park it somewhere. It might not be safe to respond to the threat, and before we realise it, life has moved on, and the trauma is added to the pile of other oppressive wounds we haven't had time to deal with. So in therapy, we can help the client to understand and process the embodied impact of the trauma they've experienced. This can be achieved through somatic work, noticing responses to the autonomic nervous system, especially as the client retells the experience in therapy, and engaging in some psychoeducation. Fanon also refers to this as the decolonisation of the mind. Step 3, integrated distillation. To me, this is the decolonisation phase. Asking clients to explore what messages, explicit and implicit, have become embodied as internalized messages about themselves and their sense of self. Often I find that with my clients with disabilities, as well as myself, we carry shame for not being able to control our bodies, for not being normal. For me, growing up in a strict Christian Caribbean household, I was told that showing anger was sinful and prideful, which to me is just another form of colonisation. I had no idea of the impact that this would have on my autonomic nervous system or immune system. Finally, step 4, embodied critical experimentation. For me, is about focusing on new ways of being in the world. I encourage my clients to find community spaces where they can be their true, authentic selves and find co-regulation outside of the therapy room. Many of my clients, and like myself, practice tarot reading, spirituality, and learning to trust our intuition, connecting with our soul nerve. We find that we can even learn to regulate ourselves through this practice by integrating this with meditation, journaling, and breath work.
Just to say, you just have a minute or two.
Okay, I come to the end now. So yeah, just to finish, this work is about bringing lived experience into dialogue with theory so that therapy can better serve those of us whose bodies do not fit the parameters of normal and able, who are disabled, Black, and of colour. Thank you for listening, and it's been an honour to present to all of you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall we? Well done. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes for questions, comments. Please just come in if you want to say something.
I realised that was a lot of theory on a Saturday morning.
It was brilliant.
Thank you.
Can I say something? Hi, morning everyone. My name's Parveen. I found that incredibly moving, and as a person of colour, some disabilities, it was like you were speaking some of my words, so I found it really, really moving. And yeah, I think I'd quite like you to be my therapist. I just thought it was brilliant. And I know you said it's your first time presenting. I think you did a great job. I think that lived experience and that passion and just being authentic, I think it just speaks volumes. I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Parveen. Yeah.
Hi, I'm sorry my camera's not working. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was great, and the thing, there's so much kind of came to mind, but what's kind of on top of my mind is the idea that each body in the kind of therapeutic dyad has its own experience of colonization. So if I'm a white male therapist working with a client of color, my body has, if there's an embodied response in the session, I'm kind of having a colonizer's experience of it. If I'm picking up dysregulation, I have to be curious about what does that mean for me, and then to be curious about what's the dysregulation for the client. And I think what you're saying about, I suppose what can be missing is that curiosity about the cultural context for you and the client. You know, what are you both in? And I thought the fourth stage where you kind of encourage the client to seek out community and forms of regulation outside of the therapy felt really important as well, because it also doesn't assume that the therapy space is the answer, is the kind of temple or something.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, because I think there's an assumption in psychotherapy that we can be the co-regulation for the client, and that might not always be the case, depending on our position as well.
I mean, definitely, like, what do I represent as in my identity? That could be dysregulating. I think also, like, even just thinking about, you know, my experience of my body as a white 50-year-old man is different to a white 50-year-old woman's experience of their body, and then a Black woman's experience of their body at 50 is going to be different experiences of healthcare.
It occurs to me that it's in the hearing of other people's experiences that we often then really start to recognise more of our own cultural position, to which we're mostly blind. That's the problem with culture. We don't see our own cultural influences until something knocks us out of them. And I do think hearing other people's experience can really help that, actually. So thank you.
Yeah, could I
just got another minute or two? So is it anyone else?
Yeah, could I just say something? I think Maria's trying to do something.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's happened.
I think two people are trying to speak. So I think Miranda's started. So could we just go Miranda and then the next person if there's time, please?
Okay. Thanks ever so much, Alexandra, for this. Yeah, it's what I think half my practice is with non-white people, if I put it like that. And I'm always really concerned. There's something you said about the othering of the other, because there's a lot of that, a lot of internalized racism that people I work with feel they fit into. They're always within a system where they're going to school, and I always think about that in practice about if somebody's sitting in practice and they're othering themselves, how does a therapist, and particularly from a different cultural background, how do we get to that, how do we get to that otherness in the other? It's something about how difficult, how to raise that, which is really complicated because it's already there, isn't it? In the othering, even in the system, in being in European therapy, think of it like that.
I think it's about recognizing the othering as well, because it can be small things like the way the client speaks about themselves, or their appearance, for instance, as well, like straightening their hair. Like, not that I'm like shaming people who do, but like yeah, I'll speak from the eye. For me personally, I felt I could only be beautiful if I straightened my hair. I didn't like my natural hair. And it's so, I think it's about giving the client space to explore these things that are so embedded in us, because it's something I grew up with. It was something, a belief I feel like I was born with, um and also giving the client space to grieve as well, because there's a lot of shame around realizing these and like internalized colonizations, like colonized ideas of the self. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I find that in families where the family are saying, go out, fit, be better than everyone
Yeah.
else,
Yeah.
you need to be. But
Yeah.
at the same time, when you come back into the environment, don't be like kind of some of the culture that we as a family might have put you in and want you to succeed in. And that bit is like seems like a real sort of, I don't know, schism that someone's trying to sort of work between, or never knowing one's place, even when one goes home, right? Because you're putting us in another environment in that, it's so complex. That's how I see it.
It could sound like a double bind, couldn't it? In a way, the whole thing about integrate and be just like everyone else, and actually no, don't be just like everyone else at the same time.
Yeah, I wonder if it's more, I don't know if there are such things as triple, or like more than a double. It's lots of binds.
Maybe.
There is such a word, I don't know.
Maybe. I thought it was a great presentation. If I just can say something very quickly, and lots of important things, especially I think beginning with your own lived experience. I think you were saying something, I think, and the discussion too, quite important, about this idea that as a therapist might walk into the room and think of themselves as sane and normal and healthy, or whatever it is, and other people are somehow different from them, other than them. A therapist with any training might do that.
We just have a minute now, so I don't know if you want to respond, Alexandra, and then I think we need to sort of stop for a break.
No, just, yeah, thank you to everyone for your response. Yeah, it's been an honor.
Well, thank you again.